Most of our previous sessions have been sort of a presentation followed by a Q&A. The panel that we have with us this evening, we want it to be a little more informal as we discuss at the Acadia Café 10,000 coffees and mentoring and networking in general. So it'll be a little more informal than some of our previous sessions have been. We've entered everyone's name into a draw, and we'll announce the winner at the end of the session. If we did do it like an A, B, and C. So if the first name drawn is not on the line, then we'll move to the next one. And we have a little swag package of Acadia alumni stuff that we'll send you out in the mail for joining us this evening. So I think that's about it for the housekeeping items. I'm going to refrain from making my joke about where the bathrooms are. Oops, I just did it. So now I'm just going to introduce our folks who are on our line this evening, and it's going to be a bit of a challenge for me because we have Michelle, Matt, and Max joining us. So I'm really going to have to slow down and say things carefully when I'm addressing questions to each of our panelists. So Michelle Larson is in the red sweater. Michelle Larson graduated from Acadia's Biology Honors Program in 1999 and spent 7 years conducting entomological research with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada before returning to Acadia as a science co-op coordinator. She currently holds the post of Manager of Cooperation Education, overseeing co-op in 24 unique disciplines spanning professional studies, sciences, and the arts. Michelle went on to complete a Master's of Education and Lifelong Learning at Mount St. Vincent University in 2014. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Next, we're going to introduce Matthew Rios, and he is in the black sweatshirt. Can't really say top left of the screen because it may be different for different people, but maybe a wave there, Matthew. Matt is originally from Vancouver, British Columbia. He graduated from Acadia University in 2014 with a Bachelor of Arts in Politics. After his time at Acadia, he lived in Ottawa for 3 years prior to moving to Melbourne, Australia to pursue a Master of International Business at Monash University. Upon the completion of his graduate degree, Matthew left the sunny beaches of Australia and returned to the sunny Nova Scotia. He is now living in Halifax and is working as a public sector consultant with Davis Pier Consulting. So thank you, Matt Rios, for joining us this evening. Also, we'll point out that Matt is our Vice President of the Alumni Association.
Thank you so much, Anna.
And then finally, we have Max joining us this evening. Max Abu-Laban is a third-year Environmental and Sustainability Studies student. He was the 2019-2020 ASU Sustainability Officer and received the ASU Member of the Year award last year as well. Max has a particular interest in seeing boosted student engagement at Acadia, and Acadia Café is an awesome way of getting students engaged with alumni over common interests. He says he is looking forward to the discussion this evening and meeting with the rest of the panel, as well as others who have taken the time to be with us this evening. So thank you for joining us, Max. We appreciate you being here as well. So
yeah, I'm just turning on the speakers, babe.
Sorry, what's that? Oh, sorry. So we have, so there's the introductions of the panelists that we have here this evening. And then to get the conversation started, I'm going to pose a question that I'm going to ask all three panelists to weigh in on. And I guess it's maybe not necessarily a question. Briefly outline your experience with mentoring and or networking, either as a mentor or a mentee or both. So just an opportunity for each of you to weigh in with a little bit of experience. And let's start with Matt Rios.
Great. So I feel this is the part where we're sort of lending our credentials to be able to talk about this topic. And first and foremost, I'd say that I've certainly been a beneficiary of some amazing mentors during my time, both at Acadia and since. Many of them themselves being Acadia graduates. And now I'm in a position where I've been given opportunities to give back and engage with current students and recent graduates. Talking about my own experience as a recent graduate who pursued employment after his degree and then went on to do some further studies. Most of my advice is based on things not to do, based on my own sort of lived experiences. But it really is an amazing opportunity that we have as an Acadia family to give back in a meaningful way. There are so many alumnus who give of their time, give of their dollars. And I'm a firm believer that opportunities to provide insights into your own lived experience to students and recent graduates is just hugely beneficial. And I know for myself, I certainly have benefited from it. And that's why I'm really happy to have this conversation today.
Thank you, Matt. And just before we move on, so we do have someone someone sharing their screen. So if you have clicked the button on your screen that is a square with an arrow in it, you just need to click that again so you don't share. So you stop sharing your screen. So I'll just leave that there for a moment, and I'll ask Michelle Larson to go next. Perfect, thanks, folks. We'll ask Michelle Larson to go next. And again, just to reiterate what the question is or the comment is, briefly outline your experience with mentoring and networking as either a mentor or mentee or both.
Great, thanks. So I too have been extremely privileged to have some amazing mentors right from the time that I was at Acadia, people who were experienced in their field, who took a real interest in my success. And I really can't put a value on what having had that experience has done for my career. It really catapulted me, being able to have access to leaders who I respected, who I could go to for advice, and who really always had my back. And I think when you've had that type of experience, just like Matt, you feel like you want to pass that on. And so one of the beautiful parts about my job at Acadia, where I'm manager of cooperative education, is that when we have students come into the co-op program, we begin working with them basically in first or second year, and we work with the same students right till the time that they graduate. And so you really, even as part of my job, I get a chance to really mentor students. And then I was so excited to have the opportunity to bring the Acadia Café to Acadia, because this also gives me a chance to interact with other students that potentially I wouldn't have the opportunity to do. And it's a real privilege. It's a way to give back and help people who are following in your footsteps. Hopefully you have a little good advice to offer along the way.
Absolutely. And certainly, mentoring and networking is one of those situations where you never really know when you say or do something that makes all the difference in the world, right? So it's one of those hidden gems for sure. So Max, over to you.
Yep.
So give us a little input.
Yeah, sure. My name is Max. I'm speaking to you today from Vancouver. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm on the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nations, first and foremost. And I'm only 20, so my experience being a mentor is relatively slim. But I've done a little bit of mentoring. But being a mentee, I've had some amazing experiences at Acadia, even in the first 2 years of being there, and some really great experiences on Acadia Café. That's how I got to know Oonagh, actually, as a matter of fact. Some good experiences with the town of Wolfville. Omar Bimji, the climate change mitigation coordinator, was a really great mentor for me and someone I worked very closely with last year in my position as a sustainability officer. And currently, I'm helping bring in the next sustainability officer, my good friend Alex Surrett, and showing him some of the work that we're doing around food, sustainable food, and community engagement, and getting students engaged with events and climate awareness. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Max. So everyone who is on the line, you now have a little bit of an introduction, both with the intro that I provided and then with the answers that each of our panelists have just provided for you. So by all means, as we progress through the conversation, please feel free to type your question on the side or raise your hand if you want to interject with the question. Typically, what I will be doing is addressing the questions to typically one person, maybe one or two, but oftentimes somebody else on the panel will have an idea or a comment. So please, by all means, Max, Michelle, and Matt, if the question is not necessarily directed at you, please feel free to jump in with any add-on thoughts or comments. So the first one I'm going to direct to Michelle and Matt, and that is, and you can fight over who's going to go first. What would you say is the difference between mentoring and networking?
Michelle, after you, please.
So if I'd been really smart, I would have gone online and done some actual research on definitions today, but I didn't. When I thought about this question, to me, mentoring has probably a longer duration than networking. Networking happens all the time. When I'm on an airplane, I'm networking. When I'm going to a business function, I'm networking. I'm networking pretty much all the time. It's about creating relationships with people that you're meeting. And I always try to, put across to the students that I work with, you never know where those relationships will lead or what you might learn from somebody just from a random conversation. Yeah, I'm probably the person on the plane that you don't want to sit next to because I will chat you up. Where mentoring, I think, oftentimes is a little bit more structured, a little bit more, if it's done really well, I think it can be much more planned. And that I know for myself, I'm often looking for people as mentors that either, again, are somebody that I respect in my field, or maybe somebody outside of my field that's connected, but that can help me grow in a direction that I might not have had the opportunity to do so before. And it's multiple connections where you're meeting with that person a number of times over a period. So for me, that's probably the main difference between the two, but they're certainly very interconnected. Matt, over to you.
So the risk, of course, of being a bit of a coward and letting Michelle go first is Michelle sort of take all of your streams of consciousness. So shame on me, but I couldn't agree more that, in my mind, networking certainly, and I don't intend to be cheesy when I say this, but it is a state of mind. I'm constantly, and I'm a very relational person. I really value interpersonal relationships generally. And that's not to say everyone operates in that way, but in my mind, networking is a deliberate intention behind meeting people and listening to them based on their experiences, their point of interest, and identifying commonalities. And I think, there are different settings in which networking occurs. For Michelle on an airplane, and certainly for me on an airplane, it's actually just a genuine point of inquiry. I'm interested in humans. I'm interested in people. I think there's a lot to learn. And to Michelle's point and to Oonagh's point earlier, you never know where that's going to go. But beyond that, there are certainly settings for recent graduates, for current students, where networking is a bit more deliberate around finding points of interest that might, provide them with feedback or insights into future career, future life development, etc. And then, mentorship really is sort of that next stage. And I agree with Michelle wholeheartedly that it's a lot more of an intentional relationship that's based on mutual respect, mutual understanding of alignment of goals. And in my mind, some of my greatest mentors are also my biggest champions. And what I mean by that is they're invested in my success. And that doesn't just mean, getting job interviews or making references. That means providing lifelong advice around your own goal orientation, challenging you to be the best version of yourself. And, I don't want to belabor the analogy of, finding a partner in life, but I do think that mentorship is, finding good mentors is someone who can provide you with those hard truths and provide you with valuable insights that inform your own decision making. And I think that to Michelle's point, it's a bit of a step further than just networking.
So, and I'm already off script. So here we go, because I'm already like, let's carry on with this. So there's a question coming at you, Max, in just a second. But okay. You know what? I'm sitting listening, and certainly I'm not an introvert, but I know that there is this thing called introvertedness. So what if somebody is truly an introvert and they're hearing both of your examples of networking, and they're hearing you both say, like, I'm not the one you want to sit next to on a plane because I'm constantly connected and I'm constantly. So what if I'm sitting here saying, yeah, but ooh, how do you do that? And so depending on whether or not either of you, Max, you included, have experience in being able to say, yeah, you're right, that is a scenario I'm not used to. here's a suggestion. Or it is a scenario, you know what, actually I am an introvert, but here's my key, key ways of making it happen. Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. Oh, I'll speak on this one for a second. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And first of all, Matt, you made a good point about being genuinely interested in the human, in the other person. I think the word networking kind of sometimes has a bit of a calculated sort of connotation, like sort of disingenuous. You're trying to just boost yourself up, and you're talking to people based on that. Whereas really it doesn't have to be like that. And the best kind of relationships that you can have with people just start from a genuine interest in what those people are doing, and it takes away for somebody who feels anxious around people or is kind of hesitant about career building and kind of what to say and what to do, then taking it a step back and it's just a human connection. And I think Acadia is super good for that. It's so easy to find people who really do care about you and who are interested in what you're doing, and that's the advantage of being at a smaller school. So for somebody who has a bit more trouble with that kind of stuff, I would say that's one point. And the second point is the mentors, someone who you can really get comfortable with and who you get to know through classes or through someone teaching you or extracurriculars, and you become more comfortable with that one person, and that opens up kind of your world a little bit if you aren't so comfortable with people you don't really know that well.
Yeah, Oonagh, I guess I would miss the opportunity not to say that, one of the advantages that we have in today's world is this access to technology, which has been a great equalizer in rooms that would often traditionally be dominated by loudmouths like me. You have these platforms that have created this ability for everyone from every walk of life. We can talk about some of the disadvantages that come with technology and access to internet, et cetera, but something like Acadia Café has created a platform for everyone to have sort of, a space to have discussions in an equal sort of footing. And I think knowing our audience is, of course, Acadia graduates, I think if you're uncomfortable with sort of engaging or networking for the deliberate intention of getting a job or of asking for a reference, for example, I think if you can start with what we're talking about, which is finding someone that you find interesting and looking for individuals that you find to be genuinely interesting people, I think that's a really good place to start. And I think accessing technology, particularly something like Acadia Café, is also another good avenue that historically wouldn't have been made available.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what happens if you're connected with somebody through the cafe, or maybe somebody says, oh, you got to meet so-and-so, and they're not interesting? Like what? And I don't mean that the person's not interesting. What I mean is there's no interest connection there. What do you do then? And do you like how I get to ask the questions and not have to?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been trying to do with our student members of the Acadia Café is really encourage them to look beyond that immediate interest, because one of the things that happens with the Acadia Café is that when you go in and become a member, you fill out a profile. And so you put in things like what degree did you do and your interests and what sort of advice are you either seeking or offering. And as we build our membership, which we're up to about 300 students and 300 alumni right about now, which is actually really fantastic. We've only been going for a year, so we're pretty happy with that. But as you grow your membership, you have to grow it to get better matches, because the matches are only as good as the people that are in the system as you go along. And so we have heard from some alumni who've said to us, well, the match didn't seem really right. And we just say, we encourage you to go have the conversation, and particularly students who may not be used to the concept of networking, trying to put across the advantages that can come out of those conversations. Again, you just never know where they can go. And we've also had the situation we've heard from alumni where they've been matched with students, and they've reached out to the student and the student has not returned their phone call. And, there's a lot of disappointment that comes along with that, just because our alumni are, they're signing up because they want to make a difference and really help. And so when the student doesn't engage them, they're like, well, what's wrong with me? But it's really not that. It's exactly what we're talking about, where even those students have taken the step to sign up and create a profile. When the time comes that an introduction happens, I've heard from students where they just said, I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed. What am I going to talk about? It's scary for them making that connection. And so we're trying on our end as administrators of the Acadia Cafe to provide support and encouragement and empowerment to students, tips to help them feel confident in engaging alumni back. But for alumni, my message is always, even if students don't engage you after that first connection, try 2 or 3 times, and offer as much encouragement as you can about why you want to connect with them, and try to demystify and make it less scary. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. And I've had that situation myself where I've had to re-engage a student 2 or 3 times before they actually responded to me.
Right. And Max, you started to touch on this a little bit, and wondering if you have maybe just a little bit more to add on it in terms of the value of networking specifically within the Acadia context. So you did already specifically say, like, the size of Acadia makes it, sort of that much easier. But from a student perspective in particular, after what Michelle has just said about, sort of creating that connection and creating that sort of starting point, what's the value from a student perspective on networking and the Acadia Cafe in an Acadia context?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say student engagement is a very fickle sort of thing. You never really know when students are going to turn up. And there's things that when I've done events and I think, oh, this is going to be, there's going to be so many people here. How could they not love this? And then like 10 people show up or something like that. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what you're going to be getting, with something like Acadia Cafe or how many people are going to be tuned in. I mean, in the Acadia context, I would say the biggest advantage is there's the opportunity for community building, as opposed to just networking. Like, the people you meet may be involved in the community. They may be involved with things on the ground, and that gives you a direct outlet to get involved or to kind of get a foot in the door with things that are going on in the community, rather than just sort of skills or advice or things like that. And I mean, the other thing I would say, and this isn't so much about the Acadia context, but with the right mindset, I think there can be, I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but it's almost like there's no such thing as a bad match. Like, you can go and there's someone who you might be like, oh, this is going to be so cool, and then it's not that cool, and you're like, oh, maybe I don't really like, whatever this person is doing, or I thought this was kind of interesting to me, but once I heard about it, well, maybe I got to rethink. And it's an undergraduate school, and it's okay to change your mind. So there's no harm in seeing people and being perhaps even disappointed, because you're just learning along the way, and in some ways that can even be more valuable than having like a crazy great connection. So it's all kind of a matter of perspective when it comes to who you're talking to and kind of what you're getting out of it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think mostly what I heard, or if I could draw sort of one theme out of that, it would be the comfort level and sort of that close knittedness that I certainly believe we have. And maybe I've been drinking the juice for a long time, and that a long time, and twice over. But Max, to hear it from a student, a third year student, who's saying, like, this is my experience already. So it sounds like we're not way off the mark when we say that this type of networking and mentoring opportunity at Acadia makes sense because of that comfort level, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we've talked obviously a little bit about Acadia Cafe specifically, and so that's a nice segue into asking, and I'm going to direct it at Matt. What is the Acadia Cafe, and how and why would I want to be involved as an alum?
So Oonagh, I had to prepare this a few times because I really wanted to make sure I hit the mark.
Well, do you notice I asked you and not Michelle?
It's good. It's great. You've thrown us a curveball there. The Acadia Cafe is, as we've sort of intimated, is a digital platform that's actually powered by 10,000 Coffees and is fully sponsored by RBC Future Launch, and we're tremendously lucky to have those organizations as partners. But it's essentially a platform that is intended to connect students, recent graduates, and those established Acadia alumni to meet with each other for the purposes of meaningful conversations about life and career development. And in my mind, you know, the platform itself operates in a way that matches individuals based on, you know, when you create a profile, and Michelle sort of intimated this, you indicated areas of interest, you indicate sort of where you are in your own life and what you're hoping to get from this, you know, this cafe, from these conversations. And you're matched with some individuals based on sort of, you know, points of interest, points of similarities. And you know, from my perspective, it just provides, particularly given the world that we're living in post-COVID, it gives an amazing opportunity for individuals to engage in a quote-unquote low barrier space where you're able to just interact over the computer. And whether you take that offline and, you know, into an actual sort of cafe physical space, or it's a, you know, a Skype call, etc., I think it's a great point of introduction and a great opportunity for individuals to meet people that, to Max's point, you may be really interested in, or you might realize, I'm actually not interested in that field of work, but I also want to know what decisions took Matt Rios from politics to, you know, government relations to management consulting. How did you make those decisions along the way? And maybe I don't want to get to your end result, but I'm interested in your decision making. And in terms of why you'd want to get involved as an alumnus, and I know this is a theme we've talked about, I tend to believe that Acadia is defined, and I've said this many times before, but I tend to believe that Acadia is defined not by, you know, a grad ring or a regional accent, but more so by some generosity of spirit. And I really do find that in our students and in our graduates. We have, during my time at Acadia, our biggest problem is with 80% of our students wanted to volunteer, and we didn't have enough volunteer positions for them. We have a very engaged community on campus, and we continue to see that in our alumni community. And I just think this is such a valuable way to give back. And that's why I think we are seeing, you know, a number of alumni engaged, interested, and that's why I'd encourage people to want to get engaged on this platform.
So how did he do, Michelle? Does he get a gold star on that? Did he do all right?
Yeah, definite gold star.
That was good. That was very good. The only clarification that I'll add in there is it's open to community members as well. So you know what, just reiterating the fact that the connection with Acadia and the town of Wolfville and the surrounding community, we have community members who are involved as well. So it's not just those of us who are drinking the red and blue juice, right? And the reason I directed that question at Matt was to hear the perspective of somebody who is sort of at the higher level in terms of some of the decisions made around entering into the Acadia Cafe, fueled by 10,000 Coffees. And Michelle has been very much a driving force behind the project on our campus, and working wonders both behind the scenes and frontline as well. So, you know, question for you, Michelle, is to just chat a little bit about some of the challenges faced with the Acadia Cafe. And you did reference a couple at the beginning, primarily getting students to respond and why this occurs and how to mitigate it. So you sort of touched on that. Just wondering if there's any other sort of highlights or lowlights, I guess, maybe that you care to share that we're sort of moving through and moving beyond.
Yeah, so I think that probably has been the largest complaint that we've heard from alumni is about the students engaging. But the other thing that alumni can do when they become a member of the Acadia Cafe is to make sure that they have a really full profile and they have a handy dandy tool on your profile that shows to what level it's complete. The more full it is, the better the matches are that you're going to have. And the more interesting it is, students can actually you can make your profile visible or invisible. So students, you get matched once a month, but as a student, you can actually go in and search for people that you'd like to connect with as well. And so if you have an interesting profile, you may be more likely to have people engaging you. And really, really important is to make sure that you select your role appropriately. So for some reason, the Acadia Café has a default role of a first-year student. So if you don't actually select a role, you're going to show up in the system as a first-year student, and you're probably going to get connected with an alumni, which you may or may not want. So that's really, really important. The other new functionality in the Acadia Café is that you can actually go into the system and choose what other roles you want to be matched with. So maybe you only want to talk to new grads. Maybe you only want to talk to master's students. You can actually go in and pick that for yourself. So you're only getting matches in the roles that you want to. And that's a great new functionality, because some alumni, they're more specific in terms of the types of connections that they want to make. And circling back to that idea about the fact that you can go in and search for profiles, I would say on some level that the Acadia Café is really more about networking, in that, again, you're having these introductions once each month, but you can go into the system and also search for students. If you're looking for someone that you would like to mentor on a longer term basis, you can look for that perfect match and again, reach out off cycle, not waiting for that monthly introduction. So there's a number of ways that you can use the cafe depending on what you're looking for out of it.
And just in terms of that frequency, Michelle, let's say I signed on as a mentor and I'm getting that one match a month, and let's say the conversations are going really well and it's a lot of back and forth. Can I either increase or decrease the frequency of matches?
Definitely. So the other thing that you can do, and thanks for pointing that out, is that you can go in and actually turn your introductions off at any time. So, if you're away on vacation for a month and you don't want to have that introduction next month, or you're really busy, you're going into a busy cycle at work and you just don't have time this particular month, go in, turn that off, and then you won't have the introductions coming. And then at any time that you're ready to re-engage, you can go back in and turn it back on.
Next question, who gets to vacation for a month?
Well, I'm who gets vacation at all right now,
Sign me up. So lots of questions, and I'm going to keep going. But I do want to recognize once again, I do want to mention once again that the chat function is open, available. If you have questions, if something that a panelist has said that you want to drill down a little deeper on, by all means, please use the chat function. We have, some numbers, lower numbers than anticipated this evening, but a very eclectic looking group by what I can see. So if there's somebody out there who wants to chime in with a question or even an experience, we'd love to hear from you. Max, you just had your hand up. Do you have a question?
I do have a question. A question for you, Michelle. Do you find the majority of the matches on Acadia Café, was it the students reaching out to the alumni, or was it the other way around? What was more common?
Yeah, actually, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure if it's data that they do collect or not. I can tell you from my experience that it's typically been me as an alumni who is reaching out to the students. I have yet to be engaged by a student the first time, but I'm also really quick on the draw. It's the same as if you sat down next to me on a plane. I'm calling you right away.
That's great. And you know what, Max, and I've had both. I've had students reach out to me first, and likewise, I've reached out to students. So it's a bit of a mix for me. Matt, I don't know if you have.
No, exact same experience. I've had a bit of a mixed bag as well.
Okay, perfect. So Matt, here's a question for you. How would you suggest getting the best out of a mentor?
So, I think, again, if we can all agree that mentorship is like any other relational development, it's about meaningful engagement with the purposes of just getting to know someone and valuing their perspective and insight. I think that's a really fair level set. I really am happy that Max pointed out, the connotations, negative connotations that comes with, whether it's networking, career coaching. I think there's a transactional feel to it that makes us all feel uncomfortable. I know I've always felt uncomfortable making an ask of someone, asking for advice or asking for perspective because of some of those preconceived notions. And I think, once you can deconstruct that and approach, either as a mentor or as a mentee, approach that relationship from really trying to learn from each other. Because I know as a mentor, I continue to learn from students and recent graduates, and then certainly as a mentee, I continue to benefit from the insights of individuals who are either in my career path or in completely different sort of sectors, right? So I think if you can approach it from a point of inquiry, a point of genuine interest, once you level set from there, and I've touched on it earlier, I think the best way to get the best out of a mentor is by making them your champion for yourself. And what I mean by that is, if they feel invested in your success, they will be invested in the advice they're giving you, the introductions they're making, the feedback they're providing you. And in my mind, you do that by intentional discussion, by listening, and listening to hear what they're saying, not listening to respond, which is something that I myself have had to learn. But I think if you can genuinely go into a conversation honest and open and wanting to learn, you'll find that you yourself have people who are invested in you. And I mean, we all know that a common trait amongst humans is they like to give advice. And I think once you can start from that point of human nature, you can leverage that to your advantage, and not in a negative way. I think the more you ask for advice and, humble yourself to know that I certainly don't have all the answers, and I don't expect you to have all the answers, but I'm interested in your lived experience. And I'm interested in your perspective. And I think in doing that, you create, champions for you as a person, who are then able to go and tell their colleagues, tell their own network about this great kid named Max from Vancouver, who's doing some great work in sustainability. That is what you're hoping to develop. And I think, that is the perfect end goal, is to have someone that's willing to think about you and then go that extra mile to introduce, provide you with that additional level of advice, etc.
Absolutely. And Matt, I really appreciated what you said in a previous context, that even if a conversation you have directs you away from something that you originally thought you were destined for, right? And to echo what Max said as well, when you said there's no such thing as a bad match, right? And similar when Michelle said, I'll be that one who talks to you on the plane. There's no such thing as a wasted conversation, right? No matter what conversation you have, there is something to draw from it always, in terms of maybe it isn't the perspective, or maybe it changes your perspective, or what have you.
And I'd be remiss not to mention that this isn't also linear, right? Sometimes these relationships take years. And I'll give a really brief example. So I'm a graduate of 2014, was involved in student leadership during my time at Acadia, and met a great mentor who was in government at the time. Her and I stayed in contact through the years, again, just out of a point of interest, of a shared sort of period of time where we worked closely together, and we stayed in contact and kept tabs on each other. 8 years later, I'm back in Nova Scotia, was applying for a consulting firm, and saw that she was on an advisory board as part of the firm. I had already gotten the interview. I had already sort of lined up, and I actually just reached out to her as hey, I'm really happy to see you're associated with this organization. I just want to make sure there's no red flags. Can you provide me any insights that I should know going in? And needless to say, I didn't just get that advice. She called the managing partner of the firm, and he showed up at the interview, which never would have happened if I hadn't had that relationship, and having that relationship with no expectation. And I can genuinely say that there's no expectation there. She genuinely just valued me, valued our relationship, and went that step further, which, one of the primary reasons why I'm at the firm that I am now is just based on that 8-year-long relationship that I wasn't expecting to bear any specific fruit, but was really transformative in my early career.
So a couple of things that you mentioned in that explanation and in that example, Matt, leads me to the question of how do you develop lifelong relationships with mentors? So, I mean, I'm not suggesting 8 years is lifelong, but that spanned quite a bit of time, right? So some, I don't know, maybe Michelle, you could weigh in on that first, like how, you know, that investment, that return on investment, and not to make it transactional. I guess that was a really poor choice of word to not make it sound transactional. But you know, how do you invest in the time on that and ensure that those types of relationships you can draw on 8 years later?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Matt said, with any relationship, and I may be paraphrasing, but relationships take work. It doesn't matter who that relationship is with. And again, it really does have to come from a place of mutual respect, being genuine and not having expectation, but certainly a vested interest in each other and success. You know, from my own lived experience, I've probably had 3 mentors that I would really put to the top of the list. And although I still stay in contact with all of them, they've come into my life at different stages where we had a great opportunity to have a very close interaction. So that relationship was built because we had a lot of, you know, typically they were managers or people who I was working very closely with. So you are able to build a relationship of trust and respect because in those types of situations, because you're working so closely together all the time, and then it becomes pretty easy to keep those for a whole life because you have such a shared history with one another. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it takes work and a shared interest. I think those are really the keys.
You absolutely answered the question, and you've hit on you know, very logical answer, right? You're absolutely right. I mean, any relationship does take time and does take nurturing, and sort of understanding the mutual benefit of it as well, right? So Max, from a career service angle,
Sure.
and this has been asked of you as a student, how can alumni best support current students and recent graduates? And that's sort of, so we've talked about Acadia Café specifically, and certainly we hope that that's one of the logical answers to that question. But generally speaking, as a student, how can alumni help in that regard?
Well, I guess before I start talking, I want to give a shout out to Michelle and Matthew for some awesome relationship advice, you know, regardless of mentoring or whatever relationship you're in. Yeah, you guys, I hope all of you are listening because that was pretty special. Anyway, to answer your question, Oonagh, I would say, I mean, the best way to support the students, I mean, to be patient with students, and as I said, you know, sometimes the student engagement can be kind of a tough nut to crack. Getting students interested and invested in things that, you know, you would think, oh man, this is so interesting, but sometimes the reciprocity isn't there at a certain point. So yeah, patience from the people who are, you know, putting their time and energy into bettering the student body, and teaching us all. And I would say for those involved, definitely understanding that the Acadia's experience has most likely changed since they were there. You know, there's things that have changed, and to not, I guess, put your own perspective right in the forefront about, oh, well, I did this and I did that, and again, being an active listener and trying to learn from those who are there right now, because things could be very different. You don't really know. But I mean, also, there's probably a lot that's similar, and there's a lot of kind of the essential, you know, aspects of what it's like to be an undergrad and to be in a position where you might not know exactly what you want. You might have, you know, anxiety about the future or the economy or the world that you're going into, and that's something that, you know, anybody can connect on, no matter, you know, if they're a grad of '99 or a grad of 2014 or whenever. So I think keeping those two things in mind, to listen very actively, and to kind of let go of your own experience to a certain degree, but also to connect on that same level. Kind of paradoxical, but I would say that. Yeah.
You know what? Great advice. So shout out back to you on the
No.
advice on that relationship, right? Because you know what, you're absolutely right. And it's hard sometimes not to say, well, when I was there, it was like this, or, you know, times have changed and why can't it be that way still? And, you know, that kind of thing. I get that back from my kids as well. For sure.
You know, I feel like it would be a missed opportunity also not to at least note that, you know, from the Alumni Association's perspective, we see huge value in the Acadia Café, but we also recognize that that in and of itself does not address all of the conversations that we're having here. And I say that knowing that Oonagh, Michelle, and myself are part of a working group right now who's looking at developing broader career service development sort of opportunities within campus. And that's been a huge priority of the Alumni Association and our board. And I know that, you know, the Acadia Café is a key component of that work, but we're really cognizant that we need to provide more opportunities and different opportunities for our alumnus to be able to engage with students and vice versa. And certainly that continues to be a priority for our association and something that I hope, you know, can continue into the future.
Absolutely. And yet another example of the close-knittedness of our community and our alumni community in the campus is the Alumni Association support for this. And the Alumni Association as an entity recognizing that development and improvement needs to happen. So, you know, you're absolutely right. It's that bigger picture and that strategy that has various people involved in that working group so that we can improve our services and our supports and resources. Absolutely.
Oonagh, can I add to that question before you move along?
Yeah.
Just in terms of how alumni can help students in these conversations, one of the things that we're seeing more and more are students walking through our door filled with anxiety about the future and feeling like they have to have it figured out today. They want to have a plan in place and know what their career is going to be. And I think it's really important to hear from people who have been there and done that. You certainly don't want to be, you know, when I was, giving the old finger point, but you do. I think it is important to really communicate that life and career, it's not a straight line. The most interesting people that I know have switched careers 2 or 3 times. And just because you're, doing a biology degree doesn't mean necessarily that your career is going to end up being chasing bugs out in an apple orchard, which is what I used to do. So, you know, you can take the education that you have at Acadia and do just about anything that you want to with it, and don't sweat it that you don't have it all figured out yet. The whole learning process is the journey, and it seems to be a really tough thing for students right now that we're seeing a lot. So if you are a member of the Acadia Café and you're speaking to students, I really encourage you to talk to that point, and maybe it'll alleviate a little bit of stress that students are under.
It's great advice. So at this point in time, I want to pause for a moment and allow any questions that may be brewing amongst our folks who are watching, in case they don't want to type it in the chat function or aren't sure how. So if there is someone who is listening who has a question that they would like to pose right now, please feel free. And I'll pause for a moment to see if we have any takers. Just cognizant of the time and want to make sure that we're allowing folks to edge in if they want to. Okay, not hearing any.
Crickets.
Sorry. What was that, Max? No, okay.
Oh no, I said crickets. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's okay. And
That's
you know what,
okay.
I'll tell you why. It's because the information that you're all sharing is very valuable. So you're not leaving many stones unturned, that's for sure. So it's 8:23, and I do want to have an opportunity for each of you to weigh in on the last point that I wanted to ask. There's a few other questions, but I think we have covered most of it in terms of the content that we have shared so far. So what I'll do is ask each of you to weigh in on sort of that kind of, you know, if I had one piece of advice, this is what it would be. So provide a tip or two on how to engage or improve engagement, or maybe it's to get started. So something from each of you, that little gem that we're all just sitting here waiting with bated breath to hear from each of you.
Well, I'll chime in. One thing that we haven't covered about the Acadia Café that might be of interest to alumni is that you can use the platform to achieve whatever sort of networking mentorship goal that you may have. So you've got your monthly introductions that you can do as often or as little as you want. Typically, when I've been meeting with students, it's about an hour commitment a month, which is great. The other thing that the Acadia Cafe has is something called office hours, and we're just scratching the surface of what that is. We've only had one alumni or community member take advantage of it, but basically you can go in and set up these office hours where you can hold small group discussions on whatever topic you want to talk about. So this particular individual who'd done this in the past was a doctor, and so felt that she probably had some advice for students who might want to be applying to med school and how to navigate that application process. And so you can actually set up the office hours so you're sending that information and availability to people who are probably going to be interested. So I believe she sent it out to students that were in biology and psychology that were around third year. Students RSVP through the platform. You're notified of that. It's a really automated process once you get it set up. It's really quite easy to do. It's a very logical process. And so if you're somebody who wants to have maybe a different type of impact, office hours are another way to go about it.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Matt or Max?
You want to go for it, Matt? What do you think?
Been like close, okay, Max.
What's that? Okay.
So, I mean, I have to smile because Max's comment that engagement or communication is a fickle thing is so incredibly true. When I was in student politics, the campaign issue of the day was how to best communicate with students, and I know that never changes. And you know, from my perspective, I think Acadia Cafe, as we've talked about, is a great platform to create conversations, but it's not the only platform. And I think there are a number of different avenues for alumni to give back, but also for students to engage. And whether that is in physical locations, when knock on wood, we're allowed back in a physical space together, whether it's on campus or at our alumni events, whether that's using LinkedIn or other technologies to engage with students. But beyond that, and where I'll close is, I also think, and this is more so for our alumnus, I think there's an obligation to live those values as well. And what I mean by that is if you're in a position where you're an employer or where you know there are discussions about hiring or discussions around hiring a co-op, I hope that we can be champions for our own graduates in those conversations as well. I think, you know, we have a small campus where there are points of contact. You've met Michelle now, where, you know, if you are working for an organization that's interested in hiring students or recent graduates, I hope we're all active in advocating on behalf of what our students bring to the table. And I firmly believe that our institution provides, particularly in the crazy world we're living in right now, a really interesting value proposition around skill development, particularly soft skill development. Our students are resilient, they're analytical, they're active citizens of the world. And I think that is going to be even more important in the world that we live in. And I think as a result, we need to sell the value of that to our colleagues and you know, to our own networks. And that's, I think, the best way to be able to engage and give back.
Great. Very insightful. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
And Max, over to you.
Okay, I guess, yeah, wrap it up here. Well, Matt, it's interesting that when you were in student politics, it was the same kind of stuff, because I can tell you it's very similar now, and we're all kind of racking our brains together around that long table in the ASU, thinking how do we get students engaged? And the reason it's so important is because I think all good things from, in a university setting stem from student engagement. If you want alumni to be talking to students and meaningful connections to happen, that's student engagement. If you want, a school that cares about the issues, the social justice issues, climate issues that are happening, student engagement, people getting involved, vibrant community, it all comes down to that. And I think with COVID, we have another big opportunity. There's been a few of them, but big opportunity with O-Week this year, as a matter of fact. And a big opportunity to sort of get Acadia Cafe and other, resources on the radar of students in a way come September that we never have before. Because, all the students are going to be coming in. There's no big events. Everybody's got, out of province, people have 2 weeks. They got to, sit in their dorm, twiddling their thumbs. And what a perfect time to say, hey, this is the community that you're a part of. There's people that you can connect with. And here's what our campus is all about. So I think, unfortunately, I'm not really in the ASU anymore, so there's not too much I can do. But I think O-Week this year is a great opportunity to get those values into students early and get students aware of the great resources they have around them, and that's going to make all the difference.
Wonderful, Max. Thank you. Terrific. I'm feeling your energy. That's
No.
amazing. All the way across the country.
Ah.
So it's 8:30, and I do need to make the announcement on who won the draw, but we do have a question, and I want to address the question because it's a really good one, and I think maybe, Michelle, I'm going to direct it to you. And the question is, what advice would you give to someone who has recently graduated, perhaps still in a learning process themselves, or taking on a new phase of their career, to gauge their readiness to become a mentor?
Wow, great question. Let me think on that. I think everyone, no matter what stage you're at, has something valuable to give back. And so one of the things that we hope will occur from the Acadia Café, as an example, is not even necessarily about career advice, but as a new graduate, you just made it through your 4 to 5 years at Acadia. You have probably had some challenges, you've had some successes, and there was learning to be had in all of that. There are students who have joined the Acadia Cafe who are in their first year, who probably don't need career advice at this point. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but certainly what they do need is somebody that understands what it is that they're going through. And as Max pointed out before, speaking to someone who's just graduated versus maybe somebody like me who's been out of school quite a long time, it's a different kettle of fish, and you would have more to offer potentially to that student than maybe even I do. So I'd really encourage you to get involved. I think there's lots of opportunities to give back in a meaningful way.
You know what, Michelle, that you hit that one out of the park. Great answer on that one. I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say even the fact that the person who asked that question, Jody asked the question, that's an insightful, thoughtful process and an insightful, thoughtful question, which right away indicates to me that you've got some serious mentorship abilities right there.
Definitely.
Right. So, but yeah, really appreciate your response, Michelle. Okay, so here we are. Clearly lots more to talk about, but I want to keep it to an hour. Maybe we'll have a part B to this. But everybody on the line certainly knows each of you now and sort of what perspective you're coming from. So they may very well reach out to me to reach out to you and look at me. I'll be networking and connecting and doing all that great stuff that we've talked about. So we do have a draw prize, and I have had it confirmed with my administrative back-end guru who's double-checked the attendance here this evening. We did do a draw of A, B, and C. Neither A nor B are here, so it is your lucky night. Christina Vallier, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but we know you're on the line. and you are the winner of our Acadia Alumni Swag Package that we will get in the mail to you. Oh, we got a woohoo from her on the side, so she's excited. That's great. So thank you to everybody from the alumni community who registered and showed this evening to hear this content and the energy from the panelists. And thank you very much to each of the panelists for taking your time to prepare for this evening and to be with us this evening on this July 6th evening, summer evening. But you know what, just another indication of how our alumni community and our students rather are connecting now, are ready and willing to be a part of you know, that bigger picture, that bigger equation, and that bigger network that we call Acadia. So thank you very much, Michelle, Max, and Matt, for being here this evening.